of acting is probably allowing Europe to lead the way by having more extraction in Europe. Because I do think that one of the big problems is, Patrick is here, so if we talk a bit about apartheid, the way it's at least presented in Europe, which I know is not the full story, having had Feinstein as my advisor a long time ago, Charles. Is that, one of the reasons that apartheid started breaking up was pressure from Europe, the West in general, it wasn't enough, it was a necessary but not a complete condition for the breakout. So, okay, so the first thing is I'm an economic historian, so let's get it down to basics. Energy has been the basis of how we transformed the world for the last 100 years. Cheap energy has been the basis of transforming the world. First it was coal, and then it's oil and gas. And none of this is renewable, all of this is extractive depletion of natural resources that don't come back, in addition to the problems of CO2 and sulfur dioxide and other problems that they create. So the way we've been growing for the last 200 years have transformed our lives forever. Let me remind you that the GDP in the period per capita, the period of when Jesus Christ, if he was alive, was around 400 per person, and the GDP by 1500s was 500. There was literally no real growth in income. The last 200 years it's grown by about $8,000. So there's a big increase in growth and a big increase in population, which was impossible without this growth. However, it has been a growth that absolutely degrades the environment and at the same time creates more problems to the environment that are affecting us, both how we're going to keep growing today, but also how we're going to shepherd the remaining resources and the environment we have. Now, why do you want to talk about political economy? Well, because extraction, I think Patrick agrees 100% with that, so always has a political economy perspective. And I'll give you an example that we face even today here in Cyprus. Under British law, anything under 30 centimeters in the ground is owned by the state and not by you, right? So actually, if it's underneath the ground, it's actually owned by the state, and you need to talk to the state. It doesn't get owned by
the water as well, when we drill.
And the water is an exemption. It doesn't count as a natural resource under British law. It counts as a natural resource under Turkish law, and therefore that's why you see still villages where they say, okay, my property is this field and 3 hours from the well, right? But under British law, it's clear what they define natural resources as extractive resources. Notice that means we still have the problems today because of this, because quarrying is overground, therefore it's to the owner, therefore the government has very limited authority over what the owner does in terms of quarries, and we've seen massive environmental degradation of quarries in Cyprus, and an awful licensing system. All you need to do to have a quarry is basically apply for a license, and it's very simple and it's very inadequate. At the same time, deeper finds of other non-surface minerals always had to have an agreement with the government. And what would happen, you'd think that's it's good. The government safeguards, if you want, both the resource and also the environmental effects of that resource. But actually what we see, even in well-regulated, in quotation marks, countries, you see regulatory capture. In the end, the regulator who's supposed to monitor is actually acting to the interest of the person who wants to extract. And I'll give you real examples from, literally some of these places are less than 20 minutes away. In fact, if you live at Archangelos, there's one example there we can talk about, right? So if you see a long-run perspective, and I said the last 200 years, what Patrick has highly identified exists particularly in ex-colonies, right? So, and I'll talk about ex-colonies, and I'll come back to talk about ethical mining from the perspective of an ex-colony that we know very well. We live on one, Cyprus, right? And it's important to understand that in Cyprus, mining has a very negative connotation right now. It has killed people, and we'll give you two different efforts where it still kills people today. It has brought huge environmental devastation, and it's linked with human suffering. And that, for me, creates further problems in trying to talk about ethical mining in places like Cyprus. Everybody understands mining as it happens as something negative, and would rather see it very far away, and then they don't care that much. That's my final point, is that the real issue for me, and there I have a different opinion maybe from Patrick, is the real issue lies in the behaviors of the consumers, and lies in the reluctance of governments to allow people to do extractive industries with safeguards in their own backyard, right? Because the consumer, let me put it this way, the consumer who's Cypriot would be much more willing to support ethical mining if he had a mine next to him who he knows runs very well, rather than having no mine around him and having all the mines from China to Africa, and then the campaign is something very much external to him, right? There's no ownership. So that my problem is these two, I think, link together, right? Ethical consumers would be much more ethical if they had a well-run mines that adapt to correct principles in their backyards. But the problem is this is something no one wants in Europe, and there's a campaign which uses, if you can, the very real problem of environment to just kick mines out of Europe and force them to the rest of the world. And I use the word force because we still demand the product. It's not like we stop demanding this product that they give. So this is a small story of extraction. That up, it's the Totalando, right? And bottom, it's manufacturing from Salamis. So mining was, Cyprus was mined from ancient years for copper, metals, but actually also a lot of forests. And one of the most shocking statistics about forest is because of the mining techniques used from the ancient Greek to the Roman period, especially the Roman period, the amount of wood you would need to burn would cover the whole island 3 times. So there was an estimate that the whole island has been deforested at least 3 times. It's a horrendous release of energy that had to happen for this. We look at the final products and we know it's been mined. It's not just what came out of the ground, it's how you had to smelt it. The smelting methods were so inefficient. And a nice point of saying to understand how much it transformed the environment, in Roman period, Cyprus was the principal use for shipping logs, especially because you could get really big and very good wood that was completely eliminated by the time the Venetians came in the 1400s. Right? There was no real good forests to be able to make long ships. Main areas are, and sorry for the bullet map, but the main areas are around Rhodes, right? It's mainly copper, but in the copper is usually mixed with other things. There has been a lot of gold, but mainly has been extracted out. And there has been a lot of other minerals further up, like umber and other things as well. On the plains, you usually find gypsum and the quartz as well. What you should know about this map, which identifies the mining areas, this has only been done to a 2-meter level. So there is a potential of highly significant finds lower down than 2 meters that we literally do not know and do not want to know. There has never been a survey, the way that South Africa does, of 3D and other methods, of actually finding out what's the natural resources in Cyprus below the 2 meters. The last survey has been done in 1963.
But the survey now, they haven't done a survey on geological...
The geological survey, they drill it. They don't do any sort of precision 3D scanning of ores, right? And they don't want to, right? It's a don't ask, don't tell sort of idea. If there is natural resources, we don't really want to know about them.
And that's good.
Well, it's good or bad. I wouldn't say it's good. So, a very brief overview from Cyprus. Cyprus wasn't really a British colony until 1914. It was an odd protectorate before that. And it's no surprise that it's in 1914 you see the first active interest for mining resurfer after the ancient period, because it turns into effectively a British colony, but much more direct control from Britain. And the discovery starts from a crazy German, literally, who read ancient texts and asked around of words like Skuria, Sidiro and stuff, and found a mountain called Skuriodisa. And of course, when he went up there, he realized, he thought it was iron ore, and then he realized it was copper. And that's the first real serious mining efforts. There were others. There's one that's now turned into a golf course down at Paphos called Limni. But really the first real series is Skuriodisa, which has been reactivated as a mine very recently. It has dominated, once it was discovered, it was a bit of a slow burner, but by 1930 it becomes the principal export, the principal revenue earner, and also quite a big important revenue for the government. And this doesn't stop with the independence. It remains a revenue earner for the new government as well. So what I'm going to talk about could be a colonial government, but it doesn't change at all when there's a national government, right? The same sort of issues and the same sort of reactions exist. So I'll show you, the biggest company was Cyprus Mines Corporation, which was American. Here is another mine, this is the asbestos mine, Amiantos, right? What the women are doing, I don't know if you can see it, is the men would break up the rock, and the fiber of asbestos was very small, and they would literally drag it with their hands and put it into one of those, and one of those would give you half a shilling, if I remember correctly, for a day. So it was piecework, right? And this is the biggest ever strike, which links to what Patrick said, that ever existed in Cyprus in 1948, 121 days, 7 people died, which I'll talk about because it links with the whole mining community. So, how did mining look at Cyprus? It was very small in the beginning. It grew tremendously quickly, but I want you to point out that employment sort of stalls, but not necessarily what it provided to exports. So it was really an export-driven economy. Very little value added was created, especially until the 40s. Got a bit better in the 40s when a processing plant created at Xeros, but it's still mainly not used for local consumption or any other local use. So, political economy and mining. Mining was always at the forefront of anti-union efforts. So there were 3 very big companies, if you want, and here they're ranked in order of importance. So Cyprus Mines Corporation was the biggest, Hellenic Mining the second biggest, and Cyprus Asbestos the third. Notice, from 1921 until 1938, which I've looked at in detail, there were more than 120 deaths. Right? The then colonial government did have an institution that should regulate mines that said that there should be an investigation for all deaths. It never found any of the deaths at fault to the company, ever. It was always caused by workers. And you know, that's statistically impossible, first of all, let's ignore that. It's shocking when you see the example of the first strike action that ever is recorded in Cyprus at Skuriodisa. There was a fire, and we still don't know how many people died even today in the fire, because there was no registration of the people who were underground in the mine. Right? I mean, that clearly, all right, I'm not, we can put, say, our safety standards back, and that's wrong, because we're talking about 1925, but knowing how many people you have underground was pretty basic for mines, even in 1925, right? It led to a strike action that was defeated by government force. We heard about the email that said you need to do something about it. Well, in 1921, the police and the church what happened, there was a strike. The strike turned into a lockout, right, where the company said, I fire all of you. The then second biggest union, that was the right wing, with money from the church, who owned the land of the mine and was getting rent. And the policemen were bussing in people to work on the mine, and there were deaths. So literally the police fired at striking workers. I think, again, we don't know how many deaths, 7 to 12 deaths from police action. And clearly even the police there, the police would say we're safeguarding the mine's interests against the workers. I mean, it was very clear that the police was working for the mine. It was so clear actually, whereby in many cases, a nice case that I have, how much the mines, the government was working for the mines, is that when the last company got into trouble, Cyprus Asbestos Company, they recalled Parliament and everybody who was in break, British person from abroad, to make an emergency meeting to stop taxing mining products. So from 1929 to 1939, actually there was no royalties because the companies got into trouble financially. And it's unique. I've never found evidence of recall from recess of Parliament just to pass a law, right, to help the mines. So there is a lesson for us there. We should not expect less developed and weak states to be able to and willing to do what it needs to enforce some standards of behavior, right? We couldn't do it even in at that time, middle income country. So why should we expect lower income countries to be able to do it? How does it look? I have my estimate, if you want, for 1 year of the profit of the mining company, and the profits relative to what the output was about 30%. So they had a very, very profitable enterprise. And notice what they managed to do, the wages as a percentage of mining output kept falling after there was a real desire by the mining companies, the government, to help them do this. So literally the mining companies are dictating to the government what needs to be done in terms of worker rights, and that gets done. To the point, if you want to know, that the then Labour government in England suggests that a minimum wage should be placed in Cyprus, and the local governor refuses because he says that will affect the mines. So even things like minimum wage get delayed until the 70s or 80s. Even by the non-colonial government in the 60s, they refuse to put minimum wages because they think that will affect mining profitability. What's shocking is how little of the mining royalties get paid to the government. I mean, this is not evidence of corruption, but it tells you something about how mining companies can work, which is, bribing people rather than necessarily helping the country. So mining royalties as a percentage of government revenue was never more than 2%, 3 maybe, right? So we're talking about very big companies. They're making profit of around 30%. They're exporting massive amounts of mines, but it's not like they were substantially contributing a very significant portion to the government revenue, right? And notice when the economic crisis really hit Cyprus, which is in 1930s, that's when the companies go to the government and exclude themselves, if you want, from the burden, right? So the revenue drops right when the revenue is mostly needed. So again, we should not expect less developed and weak states to be able or willing to ensure that revenue from mining is made available to repair, for example, environmental consequences, right? I mean, it usually goes into general government coffers, gets diverged elsewhere, and even what goes into general government coffers is not much.
Who are the owners? It's just Americans and the...
Cyprus Mining Corporation was incorporated in California. The Hellenic copper mine was Hellenic, Greek, and Cypriot interests. And Cyprus Asbestos Company was an Austrian-Danish one.
So local elites didn't have a...
They did a bit for the Hellenic copper mine. That's the Hellenic Ελληνική Μεταλλευτική Εταιρεία. The church especially. In fact, the Hellenic Bank, if you want to know, was based on the gold find of one of the mines of the Hellenic copper mine. That the capital for the bank was literally the gold bars found in the mine. So we already discussed this, that exemptions were passed and the extreme length the government went to satisfy mining companies. And I'll give you examples even in the Republic period. You say, okay, it's colonies, right? That's what colonials do. They help their extractors, but not. Well, actually, we have very, very good examples of this happening during the Republic period. There was an increased concern about the use of cyanide in gold mining, especially because in Cyprus gold was in surface areas and mixing with other metals and minerals, and very small quantities. So there's more than 14 abandoned gold mines in such a small area like Cyprus, where there's extensive cyanide pollution. Because there was resistance by the government to place any environmental controls to this, right? A nice example is that when the Cyprus asbestos company went bankrupt, because clearly the problems of asbestos, the carcinogenic effects of asbestos came up, the company was bankrupt. It was bought by £1 by the Church of Cyprus, and the Church of Cyprus gifted it to the state when it couldn't run it. None of the two actors, the original company or the church, ever put a penny for the massive amounts needed for the restoration of the area. And the church tried to do it for profit. It really was for, right? So we cannot expect the local government to have any long-term planning on the impact of the environment and destructive industries. How bad is asbestos? I don't know if you can see. Can you see that smudge? Yeah, you can see it from space. And actually, if you look at it, you can see other small mines in Zero from space as well.
The quarry in Androlik.
What?
The quarry in Androlik.
Which one is it?
Nagamas.
This one?
Yes.
That one?
Yes.
Right. But clearly, I think Amiens is by far the biggest. But it's interesting to think we're talking for a very small area that has impacts, environmental impacts that can be seen from space. This is the Amiendos. This is how it looks today. The area is very difficult to bring back, not only because it's unstable, the amount of dead waste. This has been burnt. It's acidic. It's completely useless land. So what they need to do is cover it with new soil, then hope that local endemic grasses can grow and they plant them, and then hope when the grasses grow to be able to bring some trees to stabilize the whole area.
Reforesting.
What?
They are reforesting.
They are trying, but it's taking a lot longer than anyone expects. And it's zero, what I want to say is zero income from the mine was put aside. Even when, environment was not such an alien concept in the 70s, right? It was excluded from any environmental aspect. And in the end, conflict can be exploited in either way as well. It's not only, sourcing from conflict. It's also that conflict allows companies to bully governments even more. And there's an example. Cyprus Mining Corporation wanted to leave Cyprus because the ore finds were declining very rapidly. It was, to be fair, in negotiation to try and keep, so they would bring mines, ore from Africa and still process it here. But with the war in 1974, it led to one of the mines being left in the area controlled by the Republic, and the other more profitable mine being in the area controlled by the Turkish army, plus the processing plant was in that area. And the mine company unilaterally left Cyprus, which was great because by that time we had some environmental legislation in place, but they could ignore it because there's conflict. And now that area is incredibly polluted. This is actually the remains you can actually visit them. They finally put a screen around them, I think. But these are the remains in Xeros, the processing plant. And this is arsenic leaching in the water and other heavy metals, not just arsenic. It's a much more toxic soup. And in fact, some studies have been made that showed extensive degradation of the environment in that area, including from the production side. They were looking at the production of oranges. They saw a 60% decline. On purpose, there's no real toxicology done on the oranges in the north now, I think, because they would probably fail. So let's put it all together. Ethical mining is important, and this is what the project is. But our own local example shows that companies can exploit both government relationships to circumnavigate this and avoid it. The problem is, though, which fits perfectly with the campaign, right? So my take is a bit different. So what do we do to sort of inspire more ethical mining? And the answer is we should have more mining in Europe. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but the idea is consumers would be more aware of the issues of bad practices in extraction if they can see good practices of extraction close to them, right? And at the same time, it's shallow by Europeans to demand in third world countries high environmental standards, and then when even companies that achieve that standards in Europe are here and want to do something in Europe, we go, oh, not in my backyard. Or I'm going to have a mine in my backyard. So I find that NIMBYism is the real problem, because NIMBYism, not in my backyard, is the problem that stops Europe creating much more ethical, first of all, putting some standards, making companies adhere to it, and also, to be honest, it's also greener, because the transport of whatever extractive area is, if we need it, we haven't changed our consumption habits, and by moving from something to Europe rather than from Africa to Europe costs less in CO2 and transport. So what we should really do is not push our problems to third world countries, because then it's very hard to convince people about ethical mining and ethical consumption, right? We should begin by allowing some mines in Europe that keep to the standards, and then having those as benchmarks. And the example I gave to Patrick is rare earths. One of the biggest environmental problems for China is these rare earth metals that are in our mobile phones, right? Yes, there is a tremendous amount of rare earths in Scandinavia, right? Which we consciously do not want to touch because of NIMBYism concerns, right? I don't understand how that is more ethical to allow China or Chinese people to suffer the consequences of bad rare earth extraction when you could actually be the path breaker and find slightly better, I'm not expecting to be neutral to the environment, but slightly better extractive purposes in Europe. Thank you very much.
Yes. That's a complete opposite view from I think from Patrick's natural accounting and leave it on the ground. So
no, I don't disagree. I mean, I think we need natural accounting. But
it's also, I mean,
no.
it's counterintuitive, but it's not wrong. It's not counter-logical.
No, I'm a big proponent of national accounting, and I think it's very important. But I think the problem of national accounting, if I may, is the easiest way to get better results if you stop extracting in your country and just push it in another country. So you don't change the amount of mobile things you need for your mobile phone, but you get Africa and China to do it. Well, for me, that doesn't solve the problem, right? So it's in a global scale that's important to fix it. And you can fix it either through the consumption side, which I think is impossible unless people see what is happening, right? And on the other side, by having some sort of standards that you can then enforce everywhere in the world. And there's another example. It's the European safety standard is a great example, right? The CEE started about safety of products, right? Started in Europe, and now it's a global standard. If you want to import into the EU, you need to have a CE certificate. So, you can, by making your own standards and then making more mining in your background, fit to the standards, than to demand people to keep to that standard abroad. I told you I like natural. I really like this idea of accounting. We did it on Wednesday, right, in class. The problem is, global trade doesn't work like that, right? You do your own accounting for your country, and then the factory moves to China, and suddenly, hey, my accounting has worked. I have very low, and in fact, it's what we showed for Cyprus, right? We don't have any increase of the CO2 locally because we don't use our own natural resources, but we happily buy diesel, which is worse than natural gas.
Maybe I can just pick this up because the phrase for this we often use is the outsourcing of emissions. And a new Nature study showed that the CO2 components within a product that's in East Asia is much higher. So your overall sentiment to internalize the externalities, and that might then make your local production much more reasonable in relation to this appropriate. But what I worry about is the orientation you have to putting technical ideas into a campaign mode. It's a problem I very profoundly face as well. The technicist and often economic net benefit arguments are so abstract from real activist campaigning. So I wonder if you have, since you're worried about NIMBYism, that's fine. You're worried about the outsourcing. Many environmental movements that succeed locally, like the Ralph Nader networks in the US in the 70s and 80s, they realized that they simply outsourced as a result.
Yeah.
So all of these things, you're on target with. I'm not fighting you on the intellectual side. But I am worried that I haven't ever seen a movement make these arguments, that we need to relocalize dirty production. And the question is, do you relocalize or do you find substitutes and maybe change consumption systems?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's the ultimate aim. I guess it's second best. You're right. I mean, the first best would be everyone changes the way we consume and what we consume. And that should be.
Yeah, there are movements that do
there
that.
Are movements that do that. But
I don't see any movement doing that. That's my question.
Can I tell you? Again, I'll give you my political economy answer. That might be wrong. It's because NIMBYism very often is catalyzing the environmental movement. So what I mean, and I'm not saying it in a negative way, is someone who is passionate about getting something away from his neighborhood is much more positive to then get motivated and activated to do things at a bigger global scale. So, but I do think, I understand what you're saying. I did have European policy in mind when I was talking about this. My problem lies there because in European side, NIMBYism rules. Like it's amazing how you can literally stop any effort now that wants to even adhere to some principles. You just can't do it. And for me, that's really unfair to the development. I mean, you want to uphold these companies, and you should, and you want to help developing world citizens really benefit the way they should from their extraction, and also make the extraction less environmentally damaging. But you're not willing to change your consumption patterns at all, and you're not willing to have a mine next door to you. That is what my. I don't think it's going to be a big movement. I definitely agree with you. It's a very ideological way of looking at the world.
Could I even say even further that the solidaristic nature of especially Europeans working on development, and especially as it's been guided by the South Center in Geneva and its director Martin Kor and the associated NGOs, it's called Third World Network, they would probably fight you on grounds, nationalist grounds. And in the same way they fight things like phytosanitary standards as a hidden protectionism.
Yeah.
And so it's a very interesting problem that not only wouldn't you have natural allies immediately, there may be some second, but you'll have opponents, which makes me think that going for
there are cases where you're different. So in cases of wind power in the UK, you do see NIMBYs and environmental concerns being on different sides. The environmental movement sees the need for these things, but the person who has the house in the neighborhood will fight it to the death.
That's a class politics kind of problem, isn't it?
Sure, that too as well. But there you do see NIMBYism not being on the side. In extractive industries, NIMBYism is a darker problem. And we can talk practically what we see here. Like right now, there's one mine that's been converted into a golf resort. It's done horrendous environmental violations. It has invaded the environment in a way that's permanent, and biosustainability has been disappeared for endangered turtles. And the other one is an active mine. I personally, and it's my opinion, I think the mine is doing a better job, right? The mine is being constantly fought, while the other one, the area actually wants, because they look, okay, if I have a golf resort next to me, the value of my land goes up, so there is no NIMBYism there. The local community, in fact, are breaking all the rules to let it happen. And I wonder which one of the two is actually a bigger problem. And in my opinion, it's the golf that's the bigger problem. And not because they're not both affecting the environment, but one of them is at least trying to stay in some standards. Now, whether it achieves it or not, it's a big debate, but do you understand? So for us here, this is the problem. I find, you're right, I find the environmental movement a bit slightly self-serving, which is, we want to do that, but so long as it's done away from us, and I don't think that's right. And it's even gold. There is gold in Cyprus. Do we demand gold? Yes. Are we willing to extract it? No. Okay. Great, but I don't seem to see people worrying about cyanide pollution in developing countries when they go and buy their gold rings or gold jewelry.
That's not quite true. Greenpeace, Rainforest Action.
Locally. Fully agree that locally there's, I mean, if you ask her, if you try to bring representatives of the gold, the value chain of gold and silver here, and they had no idea actually. They were literally, they said, we buy it where it's cheapest.
Well, I think it comes down to, I mean, for me, I'm going to negate what I just said before about being completely opposite. I'm going to say that it's actually complementary because, and the main problem is international trade. And there you see the difference. I think for Alexander it would be anathema to say, let's restrict the supply of materials.
No, sir. If the consumption changes, that's a great idea.
If the consumption stays constant, it's against your beliefs to say, let's put a cap on international trade. But your idea of national accounting and living, basically what it is living things on the ground.
I guess, let me summarize it better. My worry, I come from Europe, right? My worry is I see all these great campaigns turning into a way where Europe pushes all these problems away from Europe and then pretends it cares about it, right? I think that's really my worry, right? And this is an idea of how to bring it back. I'm not expecting environmental movements to accept it, but I do see it in practical terms that this is effectively what's happening, right? And even now, I mean, Greece is a great example.